Good afternoon, and welcome to the State Library. My name is Alyssa Pearson, and I'm the Special Collections Processing Archivist here. We are so happy you've joined us for today's author talk and would like to take this opportunity to thank the House Broadcast Services for their help with this event. Today we're excited to welcome author James O'Connell. Dr. O'Connell is an adjunct professor at Boston University teaching in the City Planning Urban Affairs program. In addition to his 7 books, Dr. O'Connell has written several articles on urban affairs. He worked as a planner in the Boston office of the Northeast region of the National Park Service. His career experience encompasses regional planning and redevelopment projects within Massachusetts. He holds a BA from Bates College and a Ph.D. in American Urban and Cultural History from the University of Chicago. O'Connell also hosts urban walking tours of Boston. He guides groups around Boston neighborhoods, including areas like the Seaport, downtown, and the North End, sharing his knowledge and perspective on urban history and city development. Dr. O'Connell's book, Boston and the Making of a Global City, traces the history of Boston from an economic and globalization perspective. Today, Boston is considered a global city and leader in innovation, from robotics to life sciences. Boston and the Making of a Global City explains how Boston took advantage of its world-class universities and healthcare institutions to attract the country's most talented scientists, students, researchers, and thinkers. O'Connell offers analysis of Boston's strengths as well as the socio-economic challenges the city faces from its time as a leading colonial port to its present status as a biotech hub. Before Dr. O'Connell begins, we'd like to let you know that this talk is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in a few days. Dr. O'Connell will speak for 30 to 45 minutes, and then there will be time for questions afterward. For the Q&A portion, a staff member will walk around with a microphone for you to use, since this talk is being recorded. And we have assisted listening devices available if you need one. Now I'd like to welcome Dr. James O'Connell.
Does this work? Excuse me. Is this of use to me, or do I need to use this? Okay, I'll use this. I'll use that. Okay. Got to get the logistics down. I want to thank you very much for hosting me. It's a wonderful place to be. It's an honor to be here at the State House. I just want to share one thing with you. Here's the book, and as Alyssa said, I will be selling it afterwards. It retails for $33. I'll sell it for $25 today and be happy to sign it afterwards. And I am kind of grateful that there was a survey around the holidays, the end of the year, done by the State House News Service of important elected officials, you know, the governor, Charlie Baker, Deval Patrick, whatever, and including the mayor, Mayor Wu. And Mayor Wu, when asked what she was recommending this year, she said, Boston and the Making of a Global City. So I'm thrilled by that. I don't know if it really got into the news too much, but I thought it was a pretty great endorsement if I might just toot my own horn for a moment. So let me talk to you about this book. This is my 3rd book on Boston. And what I'm really interested in as a historian, as a practicing planner, is how do metropolitan areas work? And my take, whenever I'm talking about Boston, I do always talk about the region, the metropolitan area, because that's really how the economy and the society operates. So I wrote a book about 12 years ago now. It's called The Hub's Metropolis. It's about the planning and development of metropolitan Boston. So that goes all the way up to 495 and everything that goes into that, transportation, utilities, you know, different kinds of housing, et cetera, open space. And it's, you know, planning development, which is, you know, what makes a place like this tick. And then after I did that in the global competition, I think in America, because America is such a big country of so many cities, people think that their competition is basically more internal. But I said, I want to take a look at how Boston has been affected by globalization. So, wait a minute, gotta get it right here. So, I jumped in on this. Let me just find my water here. So I'm going to start with something that happened. I don't know if any people can even recall this, but when Boston celebrated its 350th birthday in 1980, Mayor White, who really had a flair for the dramatic back in the day, he said, one way we want to celebrate it, we want to say that we're a world-class city. And people kind of snickered at that. But he had this conference. 36 world cities were invited. Mayors were invited. Teddy Kollek came from Jerusalem. Ed Koch came from New York. Maybe if the mayor didn't come, it was a deputy mayor, the chief of planning, Leningrad, Istanbul, Hong Kong, Accra in Ghana. Just kind of amazing. And they did come for a week, and they had seminars at Harvard and MIT. And a lot of it, because Boston was in the midst of a turnaround during the 1970s. There was a lot more downtown building, I think an increase in civic pride, and Kevin White wanted to publicize that. So I'm going to show you the reaction in the Boston Globe. Okay, here's the reaction. Okay, here's their editorial. A great dirty city. Despite all the fancy hotels, the glass high-rises, and developments on the drawing board, Boston is a city run down at the heels. And so long as this is true, maybe Kevin White better scratch all-inclusive references to some kind of worldwide urban renaissance. And then the Globe columnist Robert Jordan said, Mayor Kevin White has shown that he can do two things well: win re-election and make Boston look better to visiting delegation than it really is. So people were mocking, Boston, they can be kind of cynical about things like that. So people were saying, no, we aren't a world-class city. And I'm going to show you maybe one reason why. Here's the 1970s, a very mixed period in Boston's history. It had the biggest proportional loss of population decline after World War II. More than in the 50s or 60s, 12%. Look at that. A lot of people left Boston. Boston's metropolitan Boston's per capita income, that's the metropolitan area, in 1980 in the United States, ranked 31st, the 31st most prosperous, wealthiest metro area in the country. By 2021, it was number 4. If you go back to 1980, 5 of the top 10 metropolitan areas in the country were in Michigan, all because of the auto industry. But all that was changing in the 1980s. I do point out here things that were changing. There was construction. There was a surge in civic enjoyment, celebration. Faneuil Hall Marketplace was completed. So I'm going to talk very briefly about what was happening in the 1980s. This was really the beginning of the era of globalization as people talk about it. Here's a very influential book, The Global City by Saskia Sassen, 1991. And she said in the previous decade or so that globally, the whole approach to cities, the emphasis was moving from manufacturing, heavy manufacturing, to things like finance, business services, and insurance, innovation, research and development. And by the early 90s, places like Boston were beginning to surge, were seen to surge. In her book, the great global cities were places like New York, London, Tokyo, Hong Kong, real centers of business control, but innovative cities like Boston as well. Oh my God, like this is sorry. Very sensitive laptop here. So here's the sorts of cities that we're developing, these global business hubs, which I mentioned, the emerging country gateways, let's say Sao Paulo in Brazil or Mexico City, Mumbai in India, other places that were also very important. Knowledge capitals, Boston in this country, Seattle, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, Austin, San Diego, in Europe, Amsterdam, Stockholm, Zurich, and then the mid-tier business innovation centers. So this could be places like Atlanta, Denver, Houston in this country, et cetera. So just all these rankings, as I said, in the metro area GDP, this is globally, Boston has got the 15th largest GDP in the world, outpacing a lot of much larger cities population-wise around the world, but because it has a very highly productive economy. Oxford Economics, as recently as 2025, ranked it, 8th in the world for competitiveness. E.T. Kearney, an important business management consulting firm. Future Potential, they said in 24, ranked it 15th. This is, maybe numbers that are coming a year or two before where we are today. So to kind of get into it, to kind of really think about this book and how I came at it, there's this other book, The Rise of the Network Society, and it says contemporary global cities are constructed around flows. Because you can't just say, oh, Boston's famous and it's got tall buildings and we had the revolution and all that, and we're really smart. What are the connections to other cities, other countries around the world? Where is its influence? What are the flows of, and you can see here, the flows of capital, flows of information, flows of technology, organizational interaction, images, sounds, symbols. How does Boston connect up with the rest of the world? So here are the flows, and I kind of mentioned it here, and I do have basically at least one, if not two chapters on a lot of these flows, including flows of people, migration, tourism, transportation, etc. So let me get into the story of Boston. Now, Boston is different from other cities that are global cities today because it became what you might call a global city as soon as it was founded. Founded 1630 by Puritans. They came here for religious freedom, to create a religious utopia, but it was also an economic enterprise. What was the start of it, the official legal start of it? The Massachusetts Bay Company. It was incorporated by the crown over in England. This was a company, and it had to make money. So, they had lousy agricultural land around here. So it only took them within a decade. They said, well, do we have anything to export? And they didn't really have much. So they became great traders. But here we are, the triangular trade of the colonial era. And they got involved with this, and it's kind of a nasty little business, if you will. One of the prime markets right off the bat were the West Indies. And the West Indies were called the Sugar Islands, and sugar became this phenomenally profitable product in the 1600s and 1700s. Europeans were going crazy for sugar. And it was so wealth-producing that on the islands of sugar, where they were raised with enslaved labor, the sugar was so valuable that they didn't even have room to kind of raise their own food. So they imported food from New England, livestock, whether, I don't know if there was dried beef or exactly how it came down, clothing for the workers, tools and implements, which they got from England. So they became a primary source of feeding this very lucrative market in the Sugar Islands. And they would get, in return, they would get molasses, which is this kind of like runoff after you've crystallized the sugar, this kind of sludge. Well, what are we going to do with the sludge? Well, they turn it into rum. And this was the great product that they traded for human beings in West Africa, and they would trade, I'll show you in a second. Here's a map. I think it was, I don't have it off the top of my head, I think it was about 130 barrels of rum for one male and 90 barrels of rum for one female. And that became kind of the currency for trading human beings in West Africa. And have any of you read or do you own the Atlas of Boston History? It came out about 5 or 6 years ago. I totally recommend it. One of the best books that anybody interested in Boston history can own. It's got all these very colorful maps. Here's one here. And it tells incredible stories. It's got information that you will not find anywhere else. And this shows you how many people were exported from West Africa and what numbers and how they came to New England. It's unbelievable. I did have a bit of a role in this atlas myself. I did the part on suburbia. It's a great book. So even the American Revolution has a lot to do with Boston as a global exporter. It was between 1630 and 1750, over 100 years, it was the leading port in British America. That was the port. It was even ahead of New York and Philadelphia. After 1750, it started to get surpassed and matched by them, but not by that much. So how does the revolution really get started? I'm not going to get into the whole history of the British Empire, but the Boston Tea Party, 1773, what was it about? Well, the British had this British East India Company over in India, and they had a lot of tea, and they were really desperate. They were going bankrupt, and they had to sell their tea. And the British Parliament, by the way, had this tax on tea. And they said, if you're in America, you're going to have to pay this tax, and you're going to have to buy this tea from the British East India Company. Well, before this time, it had been just kind of gathered up by local traders who brought in their own versions of tea, most notably a man named John Hancock. Well, Hancock continued to say, well, I got my own sources, we aren't going to do this. So he was even brought up in charges and found guilty of, quote, smuggling. Did you ever know that the great John Hancock was found guilty of smuggling? So the people in Boston got pretty upset when they were being forced to buy this tea and pay this taxes. You know what happened? And very much triggered the American Revolution. So it, again, has these global dimensions. It's got India, it's got empire, it's got global trade, and Boston was right in the middle of it. After the Revolution, Boston, it was opened up. So Boston didn't have to kind of just go to Britain and do all its trade to get its manufactured goods. It had freedom to do whatever it wanted economically. So in 1787, its first ship, the Columbia, American crude ship, went around the world from Boston, the first American ship all the way around. It started trade with China, which then leads to the China trade, which became vastly profitable in the early 19th century and provided the capital that was later invested in textile industry and the industries that drove the beginning of the American Industrial Revolution with capital from the China trade. Here it is. Here's another map from this fantastic atlas, and it shows right after the Revolution all these trade routes that emanated out of Boston. India, China, Buenos Aires, the Baltic, all across Europe. And Boston remained, right up until the Civil War, the second most important importer of any city in America. New York outstripped it for various reasons I'm not going to get into. And Boston, until 1900, was the second biggest port for imports to the country, because at that point we still hadn't developed a lot of trade with Asia, and everything in America was imported, was coming in mainly from Europe or from Latin America. One of Boston's advantages, it was the first city to have global transatlantic steamship service, regular steamship service, 1840 from Liverpool to Boston. 7 years before before New York had this sort of service, it was Boston. So Boston was really linked into, was very nimble in making the connections with other parts of the world. So after the Civil War, the economy does really change. I cover this in my book. I'm just going to say we're big on textiles, shoes, metal products, but the economy in Boston became much more domestically oriented. A lot of the finance investment went to trains and railroads in the West, and global trade became less important to the overall economy. So, but you can look here at the population growth in Boston, particularly 1820, 1830, 1840, 1850, and you can see it's really booming in those years. And at least up to 1860, it was based on Boston being an important port, So they bring in the raw materials, they lay in them down at Long Wharf or Central Wharf or India Wharf, whatever. And in those warehouses, they wouldn't just store them, but they might do some manufacturing, repackaging, and then ship them all around the country. So it was a really important place in global trade. So Boston, up there with New York, are probably the leading cities in those years for global trade. It's in the DNA of Boston. So I'm going to skip over the whole period since. My book doesn't, but I really want to keep my focus on not how things changed or how things went downhill. They certainly did go downhill, the Depression, 40s, 50s, 60s, and just struggling to get out of it by the 70s, and coming out more of it in the 80s with high tech and the Massachusetts Miracle. So here's a book that came out. I know Ed Glazer, he was an economist at Harvard. You might be familiar with it. It came out a little over a decade ago, and really acknowledging in the knowledge economy, which is what we're in, ever more so, that talented people gather in cities to be more productive, face-to-face communications, but it's also a good place for lifestyle. Maybe a lot of people want to be in smaller towns or out in the country, but when you have got a city like Boston with its sports, culture, restaurants, and its quality of life, it's an appealing place to be. Now, of course, this book was written and the argument was made before COVID and the development of remote work. But cities like Boston still have an appeal. So here we are. Here's the innovation clusters, which we might know about. I'd like to just talk about this. Now, the UN does this Global Innovation Index every year, and these are the cities with the most intensive innovation study. And, San Jose, San Francisco, Cambridge in the UK, very interesting. Boston, third. Ningde in China, which is I think, somewhere near Shanghai, not that well known, and then Oxford. If you really think about it, this is really amazing. MIT, since 1980, and these numbers are low because I don't have the latest numbers, but companies, technological advances discovered by graduates and professors at MIT produce $2 trillion a year in annual sales. This is globally. 30,000 companies are spun off from research done at MIT, employing 4.6 million people. And these numbers are low. MIT produces an annual GDP, gross domestic product, which would be 10th in the world. Only 9 countries would have a larger GDP than MIT. This doesn't include Harvard, BU, Tufts, et cetera. Boston's greatest calling card is biotech, pharmaceutical. JLL, a major international real estate firm, had a study of life sciences in the US just last year. Overall, number 1, talent number 1. It's AI cluster. This is for biotech, not in general. Medtech cluster, top rank. In my book, I have a chapter because I'm interested in global supply chains. I'm saying, what's the global supply chain for innovation? Well, I took a look at the supply chain for the COVID-19 vaccines, which goes back now 5 years or so. Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson all had important connections to Boston. Moderna, their vaccine was developed over in Kendall Square, and much of it was manufactured in Norwood. Pfizer, they got their vaccine developed by BioNTech in Germany, but they actually made the vaccine in Andover. Johnson & Johnson, which has not been the most successful of these vaccines, but it was developed at Beth Israel Hospital. Quite amazing, though it was manufactured in the Netherlands and I think in Baltimore. Here's other innovation sectors which are very important in Boston. Information technology, Google, Amazon, they've been here for a long time. If you know the Seaport, there are a couple darker buildings between the Seaport Boulevard and going up toward Congress Street. They've just been built. They're both completely used by Amazon with space for up to 5,000 employees. Now, of course, Amazon, a lot of those people do work remotely, but Amazon does expect those people to show up, some days of the week. 5,000 people, these are not the bean counters. These are the people doing tech research, which might get a little scary. Who knows what they're really working on over there? Robotics is a major innovation industry here. Artificial intelligence, it's not in the top level for the U.S., but it's maybe fifth or sixth most important city. 3D printing, climate technology. You know, this is something from just a couple years ago. I found this slide, Life Sciences Symposium in Toronto. And in Toronto, they're having a symposium says, can Toronto be the next Boston? I mean, places are coming here from all over the world to see what's the secret sauce. Now, it's very vulnerable, and I want to mention that. Now, I gave the slide to the State House Library folks last week that I had here, and the president's budget called for 40% cuts in all research, all scientific research, not just biotech. Well, if you read the Globe on Sunday, Congress, the Senate, is feeling a lot differently about it. They're calling for about maybe a 2 to 4% cut in research. So even Republicans in Congress and the Senate say, hey, we've got research and development is critical for the quality of life and critical for the economy in this country. So that's very, very kind of encouraging, though it's kind of a battle on that front. And certainly Massachusetts has been in the middle of it. And, you know, Governor Healy, she's supposed to be speaking now. I'm not sure what it's about, but she's really called for hundreds of millions to be put into, to plug the gaps that are being created in federal funding. Though there have been a lot of court cases too, if you haven't noticed, where the courts are saying, hey, this was a contract, you know, they're supposed to get this money for this R&D. And I just want to show just another little instance of how supply chains work and how they relate to Boston. You might realize we've had a big shoe industry for centuries and a big presence in athletic shoes. New Balance, Reebok, Converse, Puma, Clarks, they all have important offices here. And this is where the business planning is done, the supply chains are managed out of here, the financing is acquired, you know, marketing, distribution. But the actual manufacturing for most of these is out of the country, except for New Balance, which does make 20% of its shoes in Lawrence and in Maine. So again, it's how these supply chains work and how they operate. Boston's financial capital. It's amazing that mutual funds were invented here in the 1920s. Venture capital, you know, where you're going out and you're kind of funding new, unproven technologies. You know, that starts at MIT and Harvard Business School in 1946. We have such great strengths here: money management, mutual funds, private equity, Bain Capital, venture capital is really critically important. But all these are kind of vulnerable. You know, we can't just sit back at our oars. There's a lot of challenges there, especially ones that could be, you know, self-harm within this country. The workforce is really critical. Hickey Global Site Selection, where, you know, there's a global firm that tells big international corporations where to go and what the strengths are, and they still say that for talent, and it comes out of these universities, which of course are getting demeaned in certain realms of politics these days. We have to run down universities, even though they're, you know, very strong on the sciences and technology. JLL, they rank, and this is in the world, not the United States. Part of the strength is half of people over 25 in the workforce have at least a bachelor's degree around here. Wow. 43% of adult immigrants in Massachusetts have a bachelor's degree. Think about that. 25% of biotech company founders are foreign-born. Massachusetts in higher education, which is an industry, I want to point this out. U.S. exports, you know, we export to other countries, right? Natural gas, you know, it's an industry that's worth $34 billion. Coal, $21 billion. Soybeans are worth $26 billion in the global economy. Higher education, this is all for all the U.S., not just Massachusetts, is worth $56 billion of people coming here from other parts of the world who want to study and develop in Massachusetts and often stay here. Maybe it's too expensive, maybe they have to go other places afterwards, but they come here to get their start. That's 80,000 students every year. We'll see how it goes in the future. So here we are, immigration. I talk about the flows. And of course, we know Boston's history, and it goes back to the 19th century, and the Irish and the Italian, the Jews and the Greeks, et cetera, coming here in great numbers and really changing the nature of the community. 90% of the net population growth in greater Boston since 1990 has come from foreign-grown people coming here. And they aren't coming here from other states. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it kind of lets you know how this community has evolved, right? Almost 20% of the metropolitan population is foreign-born. And it's not only people who are very well-educated coming here, but then you have others who are less credentialed, who are just critical at running the economy at the service level, whether it's the hospitality industry or taking care of buildings or healthcare, just absolutely critical to the economy, and people who really have to have the opportunity to make a solid living. Transportation. Logan Airport, you could fly to more than 55 international destinations nonstop from Boston. It's really incredible. It's got China, Korea, the Middle East, Latin America, Europe, of course. And Boston is a tourist destination. I mean, it didn't used to be, but it has become in the last 20 or 30 years. It's a critical part of the economy. It depends upon the year and the situation. 18 to 13% of the regional economy is based on hospitality, which employs 375,000 people. And you can see the increase of tourists from the this is of all tourists, not just international, domestic, from 7 million to 23 million. And we probably get at least 1 to 2 million international visitors every year. Many global cities have areas that develop, and I see a friend of ours who lived there for a little bit down in the seaport, and they have a global city district. And I think that this is kind of an example of, and you'll see it in London, you see the Docklands in London, the Docklands in Dublin, kind of old areas of old railroad yards or warehouses or ports which have been abandoned, which all of a sudden become available for development. And this is kind of it hosts, as I said, it's high-end, it's very costly to be there, so high-end corporations and wealthy people who can afford to live in this high-end housing. But I consider this, and I talk about this in my book, kind of analyzing what it means to be a global city district. So here we are, future direction. You know what? I'm going to skip ahead for something. No, do I have it? Oh, here it is. I just want to give you, I also have a chapter in Boston's reputation, and it's striving to be a global city. As I was saying, Boston, as we can imagine, back in the 60s and 70s, was struggling with a lot of different things. But back in the 60s, Boston said we're going to have the bicentennial in 1976, and we should make a proposal to host a World's Fair here. And they did. They were going to have it down at Columbia Point before they put UMass Boston there, and the Harbor Islands. If you can imagine, the BRA put together the plan. It was going to be a city of the future that was going to be healthy, enjoyable, and environmentally sound. They were talking about this in the late 60s. Well, they came up with the proposal, the BRA came up with the proposal, but the city council voted it down unanimously because they were afraid of the, quote, environmental damage, whatever that might be, and how the leftover buildings would be used. So they voted it down. I guess there were, 9 members of the council at the time, and it was voted down 8-0. But it was a contentious time in America. This is like 1968, 69. There's a lot of political confusion, and the federal government decided not to sponsor any World's Fair, because I think Philadelphia and Washington were looking at it as well. And anybody who might remember that time, there was just a lot of local, decentralized celebrations. And it was the mood that was after Watergate, after Vietnam, 1976. It was kind of like people were coming up for air again. It was kind of an odd time of celebration, as here we are 50 years later, and I don't think this year is going to be much of a year for celebration. We're going to have to see. So here's just another one when Boston's bid to be a global city, which I think people here would be more likely to recall, and that's hosting the 2024 Summer Olympics, which was just, a couple years ago now. And you might recall the story. We got the favorable nod to be the main nominee for the U.S., ahead of Los Angeles and whoever else was interested. Looks like here, Washington, L.A., San Francisco were in it as well. And, compete with Paris, London, Paris, Rome, Toronto, and of course we know that Paris got it because Boston got it, and then they said, okay, now what's the real budget going to be on this? And the way the budget was put together by these private sector business leaders was, oh, we're going to get it, it's going to be no cost, or it's all going to be made on a profit from what we do. And then they started to really look at the numbers. They came back to the city and the state, and of course the International Olympic Committee said, okay, well, you have to be ready to kind of take care of any cost overruns. And I remember Marty Walsh and Charlie Baker were saying, cost overruns? I don't think so. And that was it. I'm not going to get the whole story, but I have a good bit on that as well. And the opposition originally was like almost 2/3 of people were for it. And then once they started to look at the budget and what happened in other cities, Athens, Montreal, overruns, Sochi, Beijing, it wasn't quite for us. And Paris did a fantastic job. I don't think Boston could have competed with that at all. So let me go back here. And just, anybody go to the Boston Globe? They had their annual summit in November. It was also on the internet. Well, I kind of went. And they had a lot of good panels, and they were really talking about what the future economy was going to be. Wait a minute. I want to go here. And on one panel, you had Yvonne Howe, who had just gone from being the state economic development secretary to Flagship Pioneering, which is a big venture capital firm, and Taran Dorsey, Eastern Bank's president of the foundation there. And they were having a discussion about the economy and where we stand. This was held only a month or two ago. And Dorsey was saying, well, Boston has to worry about not getting stuck in its old paradigm, but almost kind of saying, is this innovation economy going to work anymore? And well, if that isn't, because, we're getting undercut by federal policies, but Yvonne Howe said, well, wait a minute. What else is there in the world economy? That's going to be the cutting edge of the world economy. And Boston is a leader in many key innovation fields, not just biotech. And I did see, again, a second story in the Globe on Sunday, that there's been an increase in biotech investment again. It was a crazy boom during and after COVID, where they built too much lab space and lots of things. So she was arguing that we still are major players, as I said, in a half a dozen major innovation fields. But it would be really great if we had a federal government supporting us. So that's a debate which we have to think about. And then the other one was on artificial intelligence. Eric Paley, who replaced Yvonne as Secretary of Economic Affairs, and they were talking about what's going to happen with AI. And he was arguing kind of the optimistic approach that AI will produce a more productive economy and enable workers. And Darren Acemoglu, an MIT Nobel Prize-winning economics professor, said it's going to reduce jobs. So it was a real debate there, some really interesting things. I just wanted to share that with you. So one more slide. And this is, my take on what Boston needs to do to remain competitive. We have to keep up the research and development, the innovation. We still have to value higher education. We have to attract qualified talent. It's a highly varied set of tasks. Economic inequality, and I have a whole chapter in here on that, and I'm happy to discuss the pros and cons of it. We have a high economic inequality, and the cities that have the highest levels of economic inequality, you have a lot of people at the top. We have a lot of people doing very well here. You know, as I said, it's a successful economy, and the money's going to people who are entrepreneurs, who are into technology, who are into very business services, et cetera. And then a lot of other people who are just trying to stay in the economy and play a critical role in making it work, but really aren't making that kind of money. So you've got a real split there between the haves and the have-lesses. And the real key is housing. And I've been saying this for 20 years. I've been saying that innovation, we've got that. And people are coming from all over the world. How can we replicate Kendall Square? Well, okay, we've got that, and I think we still know how to do it. But it's the cost of housing. And the state's been estimating for a number of years now that we need over 200,000 new units, like immediately. And we know how hard it is. And I think the governor's done strong work on that. They have a housing bond bill that came through. I don't know, it was like $5 or $6 billion. It was just approved, I don't know, 5 or 6 months ago. I don't think the money's really been trickling. I think we recognize it, but I think there's a real need to see what else needs to be done to really push the housing market. So that's my take. That's my quick overview. There's a lot more in my book, and I'm happy to answer or address any kind of questions you have. So thank you. Questions? And we have a microphone for anybody who wants to ask one. Here, right here.
Governor Healy is talking about reducing miles by drivers. What is your take?
What are you saying?
She's talking about legislation to reduce the number of miles that drivers drive in cars.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that obviously is important. Well, you know, that's what I don't have on here. I do talk about in the book. There's no way you could be a successful city without a good transit system. And I think that, you know, under Mayor Healy and Philip Eng, they really have turned the corner with the MBTA, which is always getting, that can was getting kicked down the road. That was that deferred maintenance that we're seeing taken care of now. And I think people are feeling as if the corner is being turned. But one thing that Boston has, it probably is in the top 5 or 6 of cities in this country with a functioning, and I think it is functioning, especially with the commuter rail, transit system, where we could get people off the highways. And if you took away our transit system, where would we be? So we've got something which those people put in place. The railroads going back to the 1830s, and the T going underground going back to 1897. So we've got something to build on, and I think that maybe finally the state is making that happen. So.
Oh, Jim, I was really interested in that last point about housing. How do you see that, or what's your evidence for saying that that's really a drag on things, and that where do you come up with that number?
Well, this number is an estimate from the state. You could say it's even more, but this is significant. This is statewide, but it's basically in eastern Massachusetts. You know, you see all these polls, you know, especially, well, you have two groups of people. Younger people who are just trying to make it in their lives. They can't afford the housing. What is it? The median house cost for metropolitan Boston is $800,000? Really? That means that half the homes are under 800 and half are above that. But it's like, that's very expensive compared to, but other parts of the country now do have very expensive housing themselves. So people can't be so happy to say, oh, let's go somewhere else. Though the South is cheaper, I think, land is cheaper, construction is cheaper in those places, so that helps. So it's younger people, and then it's people who are more retired who are saying, geez, I'm moving for the weather, looking for cheaper housing, and I think we all know people are doing that as well. I don't know, does that answer it, or? Well, the thing is, We've got a lot of people who want to live here. So you've got people paying these astronomical costs for housing, and they might be complaining about it, but they want to be here. People want to be here. You could fill 200,000 units tomorrow if we had them. And this at all levels of the economy and society. Hey, we've got somebody up here.
Thanks for the presentation. To your point about Boston's like successful model and how places like Toronto are trying to say, can we be the next Boston? Because even when I lived in Milan, I attended a talk there where the subject was, how can Milan be the next Boston? So it's everywhere. Everyone wants to copy the model, and it's nice to live in a place that's going through a period of success at least. But I think a lot of people simplify the story to be, we have universities, therefore we have a knowledge economy that's super successful, and that's kind of what they were saying in Milan. What are the other factors, or do you think that is that simple, that we had these universities and therefore we have this? Or were there like other factors, like, the way we govern, the way, like other cultural factors, was there more at play that other cities maybe aren't understanding?
Well, I think that goes back to my thing where I was talking about the history, where Boston, we haven't always been globally oriented, but we have something in our DNA. We have the financial sector. We have the legal backing. We've got all the consultants. We have got the strategic thinking. It's kind of been baked into the Boston area. So we have this tradition. Now, other places have started from scratch. You go over the Persian Gulf now, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, those places. They were, sand dunes 50 or 60 years ago. So you could take off, Shanghai and Hong Kong in 1840, 1850 were fishing ports. Shenzhen, outside of Hong Kong, 50, 60 years ago, was a little town. It's 17 million today. So those places don't have the tradition, but I think that places like Boston, San Francisco, New York have got this tradition. Now, it's really interesting. Obviously, we've always had these colleges and universities here, but they didn't play the same role in economic development until maybe the 70s and 80s. Before that, yes, you'd go there and you get your degree, but it didn't have the economic spin-off, though MIT is a special case. MIT has always been at the cutting edge. They've been doing it, well, maybe all along, but certainly, especially since the 1920s, when they made a concerted decision to say, yes, we will contract with major corporations, whatever it is, GE or, auto companies, whatever, and do your research for you. So I hope that kind of, but hey, great hearing about Milan. I'll put that in my next talk.
Hey, thank you, Jim. I really like how you framed change and technology, but also people. And I was wondering, if you look back at those, my name is Bruce Hecht, if you look back at those historical changes like the port, technology, the ship, you showed the first steamship, and then more recently, of course, other kinds of electronics, that's my area. But today, other cities have seen change from the airplane, like through air travel and air cargo. But today, you mentioned AI. So one of the biggest changes of technology is in AI. And what kinds of changes do you think might happen, or what could we be doing as a city to sort of surf the waves of those changes that'll be happening in the future?
It's kind of interesting, AI and automation. Just to throw out another, Professor David Autor, who another MIT economist, he studied about jobs that were lost in manufacturing, 1970s, 80s, 90s, et cetera. And he argued that only about a quarter of them were lost to overseas competition, but about 3/4 were lost to automation. AI represents automation. When you hear the political discourse, you never hear about that. You never hear about automation. So I would say a lot of manufacturing is automated already right now. And if you look at things like the 3D printing or the robotics, we have a major robotics industry. We make the robots that now operate the Amazon warehouses and things like that, the Walmart warehouses. Those are made here in Greater Boston. But how many, human jobs are going to be diminished by that? So, we're going to have losses. I think that other places that are reliant more on, people working with these machines are going to be more vulnerable this innovation thing. But what's really disturbing, and you can't help but catch it, is the way that higher education and thought is being attacked these days. It's kind of just mind-blowing how that could be the case for every reason under the sun. So we've got to see how that plays out in the States. I can't believe that the big business sector would really kind of think that's a good idea over time. So that's kind of my little take on AI. It's kind of, we're finding out, we're learning about AI every day. Everybody's figuring out, well, you know, what can AI do? Well, AI is just basically the computers as we've had on steroids. It's like a whole new level of the use of computers. Yeah, the internet. Anybody else? We're happy to go back to you, sir.
One thing about metropolitan Boston and made it livable was the creation of the carbon reservoir in the 1930s. Now, obviously, you see these tall buildings, and the demand just goes up all the time. And they wanted to tap into the Connecticut River, and then the state of Connecticut said, we'll go to the Supreme Court to stop them. But do you see any reasonable solution to increase for water?
Well, you know what happened, why they didn't end up going to the Connecticut River, is when they heard that threat, you better not take anything from the Connecticut River, they said, well, maybe we could be more efficient in the way we use it. Because they were wasting so much water back then. The same thing with energy. If you go back to the 70s and the oil crisis, they didn't have insulation. They didn't have efficient energy systems. So I think we've gotten much, much better at efficient use of all that. So I think on the whole, we're pretty, because we aren't growing that fast. I'd be much more worried about water supply if I were in Las Vegas or Phoenix, put it that way. You know, because we aren't growing that much. I don't think the demand is growing that much. Anybody else? I'm happy to have a conversation on any topic. And if not, I can meet you afterwards, sign a book, or chat privately. Please, another question.
Following with the artificial intelligence topic, regarding the point 3, the high socioeconomic inequality, don't you think like this is like a consequence of also like these automation times that we are seeing like a lot of layoffs and changes in the industry in overall because of AI? As AI is transforming all the type of jobs, and we are seeing that it's going to be huge transformational age of like intelligence, and even like at MIT, Harvard, we always talk about like what is going to happen next with blue collar, white collar, and maybe it's more like a consequence. And also if there is any roadmap regarding smart cities, talking about like Boston specifically.
Oh, what did you say about smart cities? I didn't quite get that.
If there is any roadmap, like something like to talk about like what is going to happen in the future regarding how to implement AI strategies to maybe smart cities, robotics. I mean, we've seen in San Francisco a lot of autonomous vehicles already. I think like maybe at some type of planned long-term plan, like 10 years, 15 years towards building a smart city.
Yeah,
Thank you.
There has been thinking about smart cities, and I really haven't heard that much about how it's being affected by AI. But when you talk about a change in cities, one that does seem to be on the horizon, and that's what do they call it, driverless cars, whatever you want to call it, automated vehicles. And I remember teaching 10 years ago at BU, and they were saying we're going to have it by 2020 everywhere. As you know, there have been all kinds of hitches in the research and development of that, and you know, people getting hurt and killed. And they are starting it. I don't know, has it started in Boston yet, where they have cabs where you can kind of call up rides at a driverless vehicle? I know they have it in Austin, they have it in San Francisco, places like that. But from what I hear, they think the technology is almost here. So what happens all of a sudden if anybody can just call up a driverless car in the next 5 years? Is that going to be a good thing or a bad thing? Is it going to just have put more cars on the road? Because everybody's going to say, hey, pick me up and drive me around. So the technology is going to be here. We'll see how that, when you talk about smart cities, I don't know how smart that's going to be, but I know what you mean by that. So that's just one to look forward to, that the technology is here to do it. We'll just see how it gets adapted.
Thank you so much for coming today. Do you think global cities are entirely dependent on the exploitive labor processes of major corporations, basing their innovative hubs here and then exporting their manufacturing processes otherwhere?
It definitely has that element. But as I pointed out, and the thing is, here we are, we're in a capitalist world, you know. I do use that term in the book. And capitalism is, people want to make as much money as they can. And the way they can do it is by lowering worker costs. And as I said, there have been more jobs, many more jobs lost to automation than lost to moving jobs offshore. There's all kinds of labor exploitation everywhere. So that's a real long-term problem for communities, cities everywhere to make sure that, you know, their workforce is getting adequately paid. And that's the whole thing with, you know, it's very interesting what's going on in New York. It's been targeted here. Childcare is critical, not just in New York, but elsewhere. Housing, childcare, healthcare, you know, those are all issues that people need to have, and the basic affordability issue, you know, the 3 or 4 pillars of affordability, education, all those need to be factored in if you're going to have a truly just society, to my mind. So it's definitely a challenge going forward, and it's going to be exacerbated by AI. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. O'Connell, for your very interesting talk. Dr. O'Connell's books will be available for purchase in the back. Please join us for our next author talk on February 25th with Dr. Jack. Thank you, everyone.